My experience with Crazy Stupid Love is such a weird one because there is a part of my brain that is 100% certain that I've seen this before. Hell, every time I've seen the poster, I'm like, yeah, that film with Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling, with that iconic scene of her saying, "Are you kidding me? It's like you're photoshopped," burned into my brain. And I remember that scene with such clarity that has my brain pointing out that it wasn't that we saw the scene from somewhere else or that we saw a clip of it just floating around, but that we've most definitely seen the film before. But then this same brain also refuses to remember anything else about the film but that one particular scene. So when I sat down to do my rewatch of Crazy Stupid Love for Romcom Ganda, my video series that has seen me go back to watch rom-coms of the past with my more adult eye and mind, please note that I'm taking nominations and suggestions. So just drop them in the comments so that I would eventually get to the movie or film that you're recommending. But as I was saying, my Rom-Com Garden series that has seen me go back to watch rom-coms of the past with my more adult eye and mind, I was put in a very interesting position of having zero idea about this movie. But that one particular scene seared into my mind's eye that I was quite honestly looking forward to. Weird, isn't it? Now, this is the point where I am obligated to inform you of the structure of these videos, where I start off with a somewhat lengthy synopsis of the happening of the movie before I then go into my general thoughts. If you've watched the film pretty recently or just want to jump straight to said thoughts because of the title of the video, please know that I have timestamps included so you can just keep on over to the parts that interest you the most. And with that said, let's move on to the synopsis. Crazy Stupid Love starts with Steve Carell's Carl Weaver and Julianne Moore's Emily Weaver at a fancy dinner together. Whilst Carl is warring with what to order, Emily also has it on her mind. And when he suggests that they just blurt out what they want, he asks for a dessert and she wants a divorce. As one would expect, it's quite a long drive back home, even longer for Carl, because Emily, burdened by guilt, felt it necessary to inform him that she had an affair with her colleague, David Lindhagen, to Carl's horror, who, in order to get her to stop talking and demanding some sort of emotional reaction slash response and conversation from him, jumps out of the moving vehicle while she's still driving. Whilst all of this is happening, 17-year-old Jessica Riley is currently babysitting Carl and Emily's kids, their daughter, who, not going to lie, I kept staring at her and thinking, gods, her eyes look so familiar. It took till almost the end of the movie for it to click for me that that is Joey King. She has such beautifully distinct eyes. Anyway, Jessica is taking care of the Weaver kids, Molly, who she's trying to get to bed, and 13-year-old Robbie, who she accidentally walks in on whilst is masturbating in bed. And as if that wasn't embarrassing enough, Robbie proceeds to inform her that he is in love with her, to Jessica's horror. There's also a quick shot of Jessica trying to remove Emily from her family photo with Carl that's meant to have the audience realize that Jessica has quite the crush on Carl. Which of course means that she's devastated for Carl and furious at Emily when the two return home and break it to Jessica and Robbie, who is still up, that they are getting a divorce. Jessica attempts to comfort Carl as he drives her back home and also tries confessing her crush to him, but Carl is thankfully and blissfully oblivious as his focus is on asking Jessica to not tell her parents just yet about his impending divorce, since he and Emily are friends with her parents and he would rather tell them himself. Jessica's parents eventually find out, and Carl is shocked to learn that her father, Bernie, who was his best friend, has decided to end their friendship because his wife, Jessica's mother, Claire, chose Emily over Carl in the divorce. Which, gods, Carl Weaver is going through it. As one would expect, of course, the sequence of events leave Carl with a lot on his chest that he needs to unburden, and he proceeds to do that to everyone within hearing distance of him at the bar he starts to frequent, until Jacob Palmer, another frequent visitor at the bar, decides to put him out of his misery and help him out. But before we get to that point, let's back things up a bit earlier to Anna and her best friend Liz at the same bar, where the latter is trying to get Anna to give up her boring ways and her boring boyfriend, because to her, her best friend has settled into this comfortable life and existence when she's smart and talented and could aspire for so much more. And more comes in the fine ass shape of Ryan Gosling, who unleashes the most terrible pickup lines in an attempt to get Anna to go home with him. Anna, though, doesn't buy anything that Jacob is selling and walks away. This scene is meant to establish Jacob as someone who is an incorrigible flirt and quite the consummate pickup artist, which is important because when he decides to save Carl, he does so by overhauling Carl's entire wardrobe, which, truth be told, I actually like Carl's old wardrobe. Am I the only one? Anyway, he overhauls Carl's entire wardrobe and tries to teach him his ways in picking up women. Carl's initial attempt almost crashes and burns, especially when he tries copying Jacob to a T and almost has a recovering alcoholic relapse when he tries to force her to get a drink. But the faux pas breaks him and he finds himself telling the woman, Kate, all about his wife and the divorce and David Lindhagen, and that moment of honesty and vulnerability has Kate going home and having sex with him. He promises to call her afterwards, but doesn't, since his foray with Kate gives him the confidence boost to start picking up other women, which he does so frequently that even Claire notices. And when she mentions it to Bernie, Jessica overhears her parents, which in turn has her going to talk to a classmate who dates older men for tips on how she can possibly snag the attention of this older man that she loves. The advice that she's given, she needs to take nude racy photos to get him to not see her as a child anymore. Which, side note, did this film have me infinitely thankful that it is clear that Carl never entertained any sort of inappropriate thoughts towards Jessica? Yes, I was. And it shows how low the bar is that I thought it's something to celebrate that this movie didn't have Steve Carell preying on a minor for the sake of plot. And of course, whilst all of this is going on, Robbie continues to try and pull off all the stops in his confession attempts to Jessica, even doing so publicly whilst they are at school to get her to accept his love. All to no avail, as Jessica is instead very annoyed and embarrassed and finally snaps at him that she can't reciprocate his feelings as she's in love with an older man. But back to Carl and Emily. They find themselves meeting at Robbie's parent-teacher conference right outside Robbie's classroom, where Emily is stunned and impressed to see the new and improved Carl's wardrobe, which she points out looks really good on him, whilst Carl reveals the thought that he had that he just realized that he had stopped trying with her, stopped putting in the effort to make her happy, to do the things that they used to do together back when they were dating. And this was such an accurate portrayal of how even long-term relationships require both parties putting in some effort in keeping the spark alive, as it's so easy to lose sight of that with the passage of time. And God damn it, my heart. But before my heart could get all comfortable, however, the door opened and said heart immediately went into overdrive to echo Carl's in that moment, as the teacher on the other end of the door was none other than Kate, the recovering alcoholic that Carl had had sex with, who had helped him regain his confidence before he began having sex with all other women he was picking up at the bar, the woman he never called back. Kate is upset that Carl didn't call her like he had promised, and whilst he initially tries hiding their relationship from Emily, his pretense doesn't hold up for long, and Carl ends up confessing the truth to Emily that he's had sex with 9 other women since they parted. But all it just confirmed for him was that Emily is who he still wants, who he still loves. The only woman who, prior to the 9 women he's been with since their divorce, was the only one he had had sex with. Kate cuts into the emotional time and blots out Carl's line to her about her being unbelievably sexy and cute at the same time, which is what Carl had always been saying to Emily since they were 15. Emily is distraught at this information and walks away, proceeding to actively begin her relationship with David, to Robbie's annoyance and Jessica's disgust, although the two object for 2 very different reasons. Now, back to Jacob. Remember the hot girl Anna, played by the ever gorgeous Emma Stone that he hit on, but who wouldn't give him the time of the day? Well, when Anna's boyfriend, who she had thought was about to propose to her, instead gave her a job offer at his firm after she had passed the bar, and when she mentioned that her surprise that it wasn't a proposal, and he responded with he needs to consider if marriage is something he wants with her, well, Anna is rightfully pissed and storms off, effectively ending that relationship, good riddance, and storms into the bar to lay an epic kiss on Jacob. After which she demands he takes her home, and he acquiesces and finds himself sharing vulnerable information and moments about himself with her as he starts to fall for her in a sequence that has him ignoring the outside world, including panicked calls from Carl, who was trying to get his advice now that everything had blown up in his face. Eventually, Jacob returns Carl's call to ask him for advice as he admits that he's falling hopelessly in love with Hannah and would be meeting her mother soon and doesn't know how to do relationships. A laughing Carl gives him advice that basically boils down to be open, be vulnerable, and don't be yourself. And speaking of vulnerability, Claire finds Jessica's nude photographs, which she had conveniently all kept together in an envelope labeled to Carl. She hands these nudes to Bernie, who upon seeing naked pictures of his baby girl addressed to his best friend, he immediately drives over to go confront Carl, whilst Jessica drives behind him, hoping to catch up with her father before shit hits the fan. Carl, meanwhile, has set up a mini golf course in their backyard to remind Emily of their first date together when his eldest daughter walks in, which I'm sure you might have guessed is Anna with her new boyfriend, Jacob. Carl is like, absolutely not. No way in hell you are going anywhere near my daughter. Just as Bernie shows up and tackles Carl for having an affair with his daughter, at which point Jessica shouts that Carl has no idea that she's in love with him, which is the first time Carl is hearing of this. Emily is like, that's why she called my money slutty money when I wanted to pay her ass. Robbie is like, the older man you're in love with is my dad? And Carl is sitting there with a what the fuck expression that just screams Shakespeare's comedy of errors in a way that had me utterly delighted. And then the icing on the cake, that is David Lindhagen showing up, and Jacob, like the bro that he is, removes his ring and punches out the lights of the man that has caused his friend so much pain in his marriage. Not like his friend appreciates it, as Carl immediately tackles Jacob afterwards, and Benny tackles Carl, who is tackling Jacob, who is tackling David. And at this point, I'm in stitches, and of course the police are called, most likely by the neighbors, to settle the dispute, which they do in a "you all are adults and should be ashamed of yourself" way. Carl refuses to accept Jacob as Anna's new boyfriend and walks away. Jacob comes by the bar weeks later to check in on Carl, who has been estranged from his family since, explaining to him that he really does love Anna and that he believes that Carl is an incredible father, which is why he hopes that Carl is able to make it to Robbie's 8th grade graduation ceremony, which, quick side note for my American viewers, is this actually a thing? Like, there's an actual 8th grade graduation ceremony? Also, are the middle school classes quite separate from the high school classes? Because I thought it was all just one big school, right? Like junior high, high school, or junior high, middle school. Is it middle school, junior high, high school? Please provide me with some clarity. Thank you. Robbie is, of course, the best graduating student of the class and has to give a speech. And his speech basically boils down to love sucks and is a scam. And this is the point where Carl steps down from the stand and approaches the podium to basically explain to those listening and to his son that love isn't a scam. He should know. He's been in love with the same girl since he was 15. And he might not know how things would possibly work out between them, but he doesn't intend to give up on her, which is a lesson that he states that Robbie taught him. And this is the point that Robbie again makes a public declaration of love to Jessica, to the audience's applause and cheers, and even Jessica laughs. After the end of the ceremony, Carl gives Jacob and Anna his blessing on their relationship. Robbie apologizes to Jessica for constantly bothering her all this while to try and force her into accepting his love for her. And he tells her that he wouldn't do that anymore, since now that he knows that she loves his dad instead, he's going to give himself a couple of years until he's much older and looks like his dad, at which point he would approach her again. Jessica gives him her nude photos to tide him over during the wait. Something that completely short circuits Robbie's brain. And honestly, can you blame him? After he recovers, he turns around to look at his parents, who are chatting and smiling together, and smiles at the possibility of a potential reunion. The end. As I'm sure you probably already guessed, my major gripe with this movie, even though I really enjoyed this, as you can tell from all the times when I laughed, is with the character of Robbie Weaver, played by Jonah Bobo, who was either 14 or 15 years old in the year the movie was released, which, considering production time, would have him at 13 or 14 when the movie was filmed, whilst Leo Tipton's Jessica Riley was 22 as at the filming. The film's central message, especially as it pertains to Robbie as a character, is to push the narrative that we should never give up. Now, that in and of itself is such a powerful statement and reminder under normal circumstances for us to keep fighting and pushing for what we want, not relenting until we have the finish line in sight and have successfully crossed it. If it wasn't focused on romantic relationships and how we should continue to push and prod potential partners until they finally give in. I'm sure anyone who is listening to me at this point, putting it in those terms, is aware of just how insidious that is. And to have that be the information that is communicated to a 13-year-old boy who is still growing and developing into his frontal lobe is a very scary thought to grapple with. That is how incels are born. The fact that there would be boys like Robbie, age 13, because this is a PG-13 movie, seated in the theaters, hearing Steve Carell's Carl Weaver reminding his 13-year-old son not to give up on the idea of his 17-year-old babysitter being his soulmate, and having the film end with said babysitter, who had spent the last 115 minutes telling the boy that she is not interested in him, handing him naked photos of herself for his sperm bank, and basically implying that she would be waiting for him to be all grown up, is just a recipe for planting thoughts that would certainly germinate in ways that we as a society would rather not happen. The entire premise of this film, specifically as it pertains to Robbie's storyline, basically boils down to ignore all her objections and no's and wear her down until she finally capitulates at the end. We start to build the expectation that a capitulation will happen, which is why we hear words like, just give it time, she will eventually say yes, or my personal favorite, why are you being so difficult and playing hard to get? This is where the bullshit line starts. This is where we see the seeds planted. And I know it is a rom-com. I know we are not meant to take it seriously. I know that as adults, we know better. But the interesting thing about this video series that I have been doing, where once a week I pick a rom-com from when I was younger and either do a first-time watch or a rewatch to see the parts of the messaging that I missed as a child and the dangers present in them and what they have to say about love and romantic relationships, is the fact that I ultimately get to put myself into my teenage self's shoes to realize that some media really did fuck me up with regards my expectations of relationships and some of my behavioral traits in them. Crazy Stupid Love is no different. And before you say otherwise, please remember that we are having this conversation as adults. And like my video title says, I would like us to imagine/picture what a film like this basically communicated to young, impressionable boys who saw it immediately it was released or sometime afterwards. Because I don't know about you, but I am worried as hell. And before you tell me that, well, Robbie does apologize at the end and expresses his regret for pushing Jessica and not respecting her objections, and that he tells her that he wouldn't do that anymore, do consider the fact that the movie immediately follows up the apology by having Jessica give him her nude photos and a kiss on his cheek. There is a disconnect in an apology for wrongdoing that is immediately followed by what seems to be a reward for that same wrongdoing. And considering the fact that Jessica's nudes and kiss on the cheek happen after the apology, it means that her actions that seem to be condoning or rewarding his persistence is something that would stay with the audience on a subconscious level longer than the apology would. Plus, the problem wasn't even just with Robbie. Like I said, the movie legit kept pushing the messaging of never giving up and refusing to take no for an answer, running roughshod over what the other party wants or says or needs, all with the aim of achieving your own goal. It is a clear thought throughout the entire film that Carl isn't over his wife, and even though he tries to move on, he still loves her and wants her. We see him hanging around his former home, which, to be fair, the movie does paint as romantic, with him basically helping his family fix things around the yard without their knowledge because he wants to help and keep things comfortable for them. I am not going to lie, I thought that that was sweet and kind of him, but a part of my brain also kept screaming that he is basically stalking his ex at this point, peeping in on her private moments with their kids. And whilst Carl is a decent person, there have been instances of estranged husbands who have used those moments instead to cause serious harm to their exes. And yet we are meant to read it as romantic, as Carl still being in love with his ex and doing things for her, even when she has no idea that he can see her feeding their kids ice cream and calling him to lie about a broken down equipment at home because she misses the sound of his voice. And it wasn't only with the romantic relationships that push this whole disregard for other people's boundaries and personal space bits. We see this reflected in the interactions between Carl and Jacob. Their entire friendship starts because Carl is devastated about his impending divorce and Emily's cheating on him, and has for days in a row been telling everyone at the bar about him being cuckolded by David Lindhagen, and Jacob, who sees in him a mirror of his own overly emotional and sensitive father, which we are meant to infer via the moment of vulnerability with Anna when he tells her about his parents. But as I was saying, even with the interactions between Carl and Jacob, we see a clear case of Jacob not even bothering to pay attention to anything that Carl remotely wants, as he's laser focused on turning him into this whole different person than he was when they first met. And sure, it is played for laughs, and I did cackle at Carl getting his licks back in by slapping Jacob when he got the chance to at the end of the movie, but I could still recognize that, just as Carl points out that Jacob rarely pays attention to the women he's interested in and just merely dictates to them what they would be having, plies them with drinks and pretends to be interested in what they have to say and then informs them that they will be going home with him, we see traces and elements of that same behavior in his friendship with Carl as well. This man that he took on as a project and refuses to allow his voice come through because he's obsessed with transforming him into a mini version of himself. Even with the friendship depicted in the movie, there is a selfishness that is centered around the individual and what they want rather than what the other person desires or needs of them as well. And this is not just with Jacob and Carl. We also see this with Bernie and Carl as well, where the former basically ends their friendship because his wife insists that a divorce means that the couple would have to split their friendships as well, and Claire chose Emily. And yet when Carl runs into Bernie at the mall and the latter is stuck and in need of aid, he calls to Carl, who thankfully ignores him because my vindictive ass was yelling, "You better not pay that man any mind, Carl," at my TV. I will, of course, admit that I appreciated that we could clearly see that Jacob's usual MO did not apply or work in his relationship with Anna. No matter how he tried the first time that he ran into her at the bar, she refused to give him the time of day and didn't allow him to wear her down. And she was out of the picture in all the times when he was training Carl on how to be the next stud. And when it was that she did come back into the picture, she did so on her own terms, being the one to make the move and basically set the pace for her and Jacob's relationship. And I also appreciate the fact that whilst it was implied that it could happen in the future, we didn't actually see Carl and Emily reconcile and return back to their marriage at the end of the film. Instead, we leave with the hopeful note that it is possible and that they would eventually, that they would and could eventually walk their way back to each other, which makes me happy because I'm sorry, I am a sucker for childhood loves. But also, I want it to take its time and not have any one of them feel pressured. What still left me with a bad taste in my mouth at the end, however, was everything that happened with Robbie. But then again, maybe that's just me, and you think I'm reading way too much into this or that I'm being very unfair to this film. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share this if you want. Support me on Patreon if you can. If you can't, however, do consider checking out my other channels. One is my gaming channel, and the other holds my ASMR content. Both channels are linked in the description box if they sound like something you might possibly potentially be interested in. Whichever the case may be, however, I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.